The Royal Commission? Well, you know what a Royal Commission is. Right. Okay. The circumstances of it was that it had taken more than 2 years to capture a gang of outlaws. So there was a general feeling in the public that the police had not acted in a particularly efficient way, particularly the detective branch. So a commission, there were many people in politics and in the general public who called for a Royal Commission to be set up to investigate a number of elements of the whole preceding saga of the Kelly outbreak. And that began sitting, I think, in 1882. Kelly was captured in July 1880. He was executed in November. So it took a little while to set it up. And in 1880, might have been 1881, it was set up, and I think they started hearing in 1882. It's referred to as the Longmore Royal Commission because the Member of Parliament who was the chairman of the commission was Longmore. That was his surname. And it was tasked with inquiring into a number of things mostly regarding the Kelly outbreak. Firstly, how such a thing could happen. Secondly, how had the police operated in terms of solving the issue. One of the questions was related specifically to the efficiencies and working methods of the detective branch, and there was one, and the fourth question was relating to the structure of Victoria Police generally. And they took hearings over a couple of years, and I think they issued reports at different times. There was a separate report, as I've intimated, on the detective branch, for example, and one of the recommendations in that report was that the detective branch be subsumed by the general force, that they become more closely part of the Victoria Police.
Jerry, thanks very much for that. Do you happen to know whether some policemen were native born? Born in Australia, or were they mostly migrants?
Well, there were certainly some who were native born. Thomas O'Callaghan was one. He was born in Parramatta in New South Wales. I'm sure, I don't know the figures, but I'm sure that there were a lot. I mean, I know that perhaps what you're alluding to is the very high Irishness of the force, and this has been a discussion point over many, many years, that a high percentage of the force was in fact from Ireland, and Kelly was also thought, well, his father certainly was Irish, although Kelly himself was native born, and so why would the Irish be fighting the Irish? Well, only the Irish would know that, but I don't think it was ever a large percentage. I mean, clearly there were a lot of English, there were a lot of Irish, but there were also a lot of native-born men. This was in the 1880s, after all. The force had been in existence since 1853.
Initially you said that there had been a prolific amount of books, which we all know about their colour. And maybe it might be an interest in criminals or gangsters. But no, I suggest that this is a real aspect of that interest through time, because there are major issues of universal issues that challenge democracy at the time. And the challenges weren't just about the police force or the Irish, it was about the issues that existed at the time. Substantially challenge the development of democracy in this country.
That may or may not be the case. I'm not going to enter into that debate, but my point was that in terms of published output, there's a great deal about Ned Kelly and his gang, and not all of it relating. In fact, only I think a small minority of the output that's been published about Kelly would address those issues. A lot of it relates to the individual you know, and his subsequent standing, which gets bigger through time. I mean, undoubtedly what you say, you know, it may or may not be the case, but a lot of it isn't really addressing that. And it's really, my point was, you don't see that much published work about the police force, and they were in everything.
Where was the police headquarters in those days in Melbourne?
That's a good question. Well, let me think about this a second. So they were in the old building that is referred to as police headquarters, the Russell Street building, D24, although D24 wasn't there. That building itself, the building we see now, although it's just a shell with apartments inside, that was actually built in 1940s, early 1940s, but there had been buildings on that site from the 1850s.
Gary, is the white building on the corner attached to?
Yes.
That's part of the old complex, isn't it?
Well, the complex itself, yes, that whole block has a number of different aged buildings on it. The oldest building on that block would be the tower, and that's modelled quite clearly on the Empire State Building. That was built in the early 1940s. The barracks building is the one right on the corner, and that took the place of another building that was previously there. And then in the 1970s there was a tower built, which I think has now been dismantled, but there was another building behind that as well. And the original, the other block building that's on that site is the former headquarters of the detective branch, which is on the corner of Mackenzie Street and Russell Street, and that's the oldest one. That's an 1880s building.
And there is a wonderful sketch up in the William Street end of town, isn't it, of the first lock-up that caught fire and people escaped from and all the rest.
Right.
Any other questions? Yes.
How long did the Kelly gang reign for, and what sort of made up that gang?
What made up the gang? Okay. The actual incident which led to them being well, Ned Kelly, his brother Dan, and two Confederates, Aaron Sherritt and Joe Byrne. These four men were camped at Stringy Bark, and they were discovered by a party of police. There was a gunfight, 3 policemen were killed, and that was in October, or right at the end of September 78, sorry. And from that point, one policeman escaped, Thomas McIntyre, and he raised the alarm, so to speak. And from that point, those 4 men who constituted the Kelly gang were declared outlaws. And they, as I said, in February the following year, 1879, they raided Jerilderie and held up the bank there. And they generally had pretty free rein across the countryside. But the police seemed to have difficulties tracking them, and that's the point about the trackers, which unfortunately the original group of trackers who were sent down, who were Queensland troopers, sent down from Queensland, if they'd been deployed as they should have been, then the gang may well have been caught sooner than it was. Ultimately, it ended with a siege at Glenrowan in July 1880, when 3 members of the gang were killed and Ned Kelly was captured.